Hey everyone, in today's show, I'm going to discuss a pressing issue right now, exempt and non-exempt classifications. With the pending change under the Biden administration's new rules, on July 1st, 2024, salary levels were set to change for who can be an exempt worker. However, we have some legal challenges that have halted these new rules. And I'm also going to explore how to investigate an allegation of wrongful worker classification. This is one you won't want to miss.
Welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivy, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey everybody, and especially new listeners to the HR Investigations Podcast. I'm happy to announce that we recently achieved a great milestone of 5,000 downloads from the show. So thank you to all of you who continue to listen to my show. I really appreciate it. And also, I love to hear from you. I love mail. So please email me any questions you have or any topics that you'd like me to discuss on a future podcast. And you can just send those to my email, which is Natalie, that's Natalie, at rpchr.com. All right. In today's show, I'm going to discuss a pressing issue right now, exempt and non-exempt classifications. With the pending change under the Biden administration's new rules, as of July 1st, salary levels were set to change for who can actually be an exempt worker. However, we have some legal challenges, and that has halted these new rules. And then I'm also going to discuss how to really investigate an allegation of wrongful worker classification. So let's get started first by getting clear. What's the difference? What's an exempt versus what's a non-exempt? Right. First of all, an exempt employee is typically an employee that is of a more professional nature. Typically managers, supervisors, doctors, attorneys, software engineers, the folks that are earning a salaried basis and they are performing work that is more professional in nature. All right, they're not swinging a hammer and striking a nail to hang drywall or putting in electrical sockets. That's more blue-collar work, which is always going to be non-exempt. The other piece with the difference between exempt and non-exempt, exempt workers receive a guaranteed salary every single week. That's regardless of the amount of hours that they work. So some of you who are exempts know that if you work 55 hours a week, you're still making the same amount of money and there is no overtime pay. On the other hand, a non-exempt worker is someone who does not have a guarantee. Let's say you have two employees, let's say Sean and Brandon, who are construction workers who are working on a job site to build a high-rise building in New York. Let's say raw materials are running late. They're not going to show up until next week. Let's say they're building a fireplace in the restaurant in the ground floor of the building. Well, they can't put the restaurant together if they don't have the bricks to build it. All right. So the superintendent could just say, hey, fellas, sorry, I've got to send you home today with 30 hours because we don't have any work for you. Oh, man. Okay, that's kind of the way it works. But then come next week, they're building the fireplace, they're building the restaurant, they're doing the rest of the build out because now all of the construction supplies have shown up and they might even work 15, 20 hours of overtime the next week to get caught up. So that's how it works. But exempt employees just simply receive a salary every single week that they work. Now, the way that we determine whether somebody is an exempt employee is using what are called the white-collar duties tests. They're known as white-collar exemptions. And these are various categories, and they're divided based on occupation. So you have the following exemptions: executive, administrative, learned professional, creative professional, computer professional, outside sales professional, and a highly compensated professional. Each one of those categories has a duties test that you have to walk through and have yes answers for each of the bullet points in the duties test. As an example, with the exempt duties test, what you have to identify, an exempt executive is someone who is going to manage others, manage at least two full-time employees. That means FTEs. So it could be one full-time and two part-timers or four part-timers. As long as it's two FTEs, it will meet that requirement. But under an executive exempt, as an example, they have to meet or exceed the salary level, and that's what we're going to talk about in just a moment. They have to manage an enterprise, department, or a subdivision. They have to customarily direct the work of two or more full-time employees and the full-time equivalents, and they have to have the authority to hire and fire or even recommend hiring and firing and promoting the status change of other employees. And all of those things have to be met in order for someone to be an exempt. So each of the duties tests has bullet points like this that you have to have yes answers, if you will, all the way down in order for that person to be exempt. So the key thing that we're really going to focus on right now is what's going on with the salary levels. All right, as of right now, up to July 1st, 2024, in order for a worker to be classified as an exempt employee, they had to make $684 per week, which is the equivalent of $35,568. Now, they can also earn for that threshold up to 10% in commissions, bonuses, and other things as well. Here's the change, though. The Biden administration has published new rules that were set to change as of July 1st, which would increase that standard salary level to $844 per week, which is $43,888 per year. And then as of January 1st, 2025, that was going to reset again to $1,128 per week, which really is a spike up to $58,656 per year. And then the rules stated that every 3 years after July 1st, 2027, those were going to continually reset. Now, with that said, there have been some challenges. All right, 2 cases were filed in the U.S. District Court in the Eastern District of Texas. So it's the state of Texas versus the Department of Labor that was filed on June 3rd, 2024, and also the Plano Chamber of Commerce. That was another one filed May 24th, 2024. Then a motion for injunctive relief was filed in the Texas matter to prevent the DOL from implementing this rule on July 1st. And so it currently is pending. And so these plaintiffs have argued that the court should really set aside this rule, the 2024 rule, for the same reasons why the court set aside the Obama-era rule. For those of you who have been in HR a while, if you recall, the last was on or about May of 2016, as it was the last 6 months or so of President Obama's term. He did the same thing. And the thresholds were really, really extraordinary with what the Obama administration was wanting to put forth. And it was literally going to increase the salary threshold greater than 100%. And that was set to change basically within 6 months' time. Most businesses cannot react to changes in compensation that are that radical in that short of a period of time. Certainly as a consultant, I agree that salary thresholds needed to change. They did later change. Later in the Trump administration, they did actually increase. They were just not as significant. But, generally business doesn't like too much too fast. And also, the other challenge is the rules regarding who can be exempt. It should not be based on just salary threshold alone. And that is a lot of what the legal arguments are today. My personal feeling on the matter, having been around for a really long time in HR and been through a number of go-arounds with adjusting these salary thresholds, my approach to this is very much a wait-and-see approach. What we need to do is monitor these legal cases to see if the salary levels are overturned by the courts. So if the court rules in the employer's favor, the plaintiffs in these cases, then the Biden salaries will be negated. In other words, everything will stay exactly the same as it is now, and the salary level for who can be an exempt employee would remain at $684 per week or $35,568 per year. However, if the court rules in the Biden administration's favor, the defendant, then the salary levels will change. All right, so what does that mean for HR professionals, employers? What do you need to do right now? Well, I would get moving on your exempt and your non-exempt classifications. Now's the time to review your current exempt classifications. You want to identify anybody that is wrongfully classified. All right, so how do you do that? Well, first of all, you need to look at what the employee does. And I've been through a number of go-arounds over the years with clients, as have other members of my team. And one issue comes to mind. I was working with a COO. His name is Chris, lovely guy. He and I are still friends. But he was really pushing back when I said to him that one of his e-commerce specialists, this is basically an e-commerce and fulfillment type of organization, and Isabella, who was one of his employees, he was really wanting to classify her as an exempt. And I said, Chris, She does routine, repetitive work. She goes into your site. She works on a WordPress site, their website, makes adjustments to their e-commerce stuff, making changes in pricing, doing product promotions, putting in coupon codes, that sort of thing. Important work, yes, but exempt level, no. And when I really questioned him on significant decisions that Isabella made, he had to finally admit, okay, all right, so she does have to ask her boss if we're going to do a special campaign or something or other. In other words, she didn't really have significant decision-making authority. And when we walked through each of the exempt duties tests, not a single one fit. The administrative one, the administrative duties test, the exemption, was probably the only one that might have fit. But when it really came down to using discretion and independent judgment with really things that were significant, she wasn't making significant decisions. She's a non-exempt employee. And so this is probably the argument that you get. A lot of you who work in HR or compensation with your leaders. Of course, leaders really want more workers classified as exempt because it helps to lower labor costs. But if you get caught by the Wage and Hour Division at the Department of Labor, I assure you that that is a painful experience. It's expensive, not just having to pay the back overtime wages. And by the way, the statute of limitations is 2 years. So if you had an employee that was wrongfully classified, then you're going to have to go back to fix it. You're going to have to go back 2 years and figure out what you owe that employee. Then also, a lot of exempts don't actually write down the amount of hours that they work every week. They just have kind of a set schedule. So now you're going to have to negotiate with that employee on how much overtime you actually owe them, right? Best practice, by the way, I always have my exempts documenting their time. I don't care if they come in at 7 a.m. and leave at 3, or they come in at 9 and they leave at 6:30. I don't care about that, but I want total hours for the week. That way, if we start to see some significant changes and hours are climbing, that tells us that maybe our headcount for FTEs is off. It also allows us to do good headcount forecasting. And by the way, we now have records if we ever had a misclassified scenario, right? So there's your best practice for the day on that. So some other things that you need to do right now. You need to really look at your employees and their salaries and then identify those that might be affected if the new rules do take effect. So it may be that you will have to retro back to, let's say, July 1st. I'm not sure. It just depends on how it shakes out in the court case. But what you will have to do if the new rules take effect is either increase those salary thresholds. So if you had someone who was currently below the salary threshold of, let's say, 844 that was set for July 1, if they're not there then and they're at 684 or let's say at 700, they're less than that, then you're going to have to bring their salary up to that threshold in order for them to remain as classified as an exempt employee. Or you just simply convert them to a non-exempt, but just understand they will be eligible for overtime pay. So whatever their current rate is, hourly rate, you need to compute that out at time and a half and then do that comparison. The other thing that you also will need to take a look at is what would happen if the salary threshold is going to set to 1128 as of January 1st, or perhaps at a later date. If that changes, then you're going to need to also do that same math. Do the comparison. If you keep the employee as an exempt and increase the salary, how much is that versus what would the cost factor be with computing the overtime pay? And what you're really going to need to know is the average amount of overtime that particular employee works. Now, if the employee never really works any overtime, then okay, that's not really that big of a deal. And it probably just makes sense for you to just increase the salary threshold. But if this is someone who truly is working perhaps 55 hours a week, all right, that's 15 hours of overtime. So you're going to have to compare bringing the salary threshold up to those 15 hours of time and a half and what that's going to look like as an expenditure. You're going to need to do a little bit of the math here. The other thing you need to think about with the classification of your workers here and possibly making that change to have someone move from an exempt to a non-exempt is just the frustration that employees are going to have in the employee relations issue. You're going to have some folks that have been used to kind of being able to come and go as they please. They don't have to punch a clock. But if you do shift them to a non-exempt, well, now they're going to be punching a clock. And they may really resent the fact that they no longer have that sort of freedom and flexibility. So this is also another part of the pushback with a lot of these employers that have filed these cases against the administration. because it is a lot of salary at one time, but it is also not really looking at the duties tests at all. It is just simply defining an exempt based on the salary that they're paid. And that really is not an accurate portrayal of what an exempt is. So let's talk a little bit about what to do if you have a misclassified employee. As I said earlier, you definitely need to do the analysis and then figure out back overtime. If someone really has been working overtime, 10 hours, 12, 15, you're going to have to go back 2 years, so 24 months from the date that you're doing this analysis, and figure out what you owe them. Now, even if an employee has been with you 5 years, you only are required to go back and pay back pay for 2 years. Now, that is entirely up to you. From my standpoint, if you have made an ethical mistake here, I think that you need to make it right for the employee, but that's just my personal opinion. You're going to then need to update the job description, and you're going to have to reflect that, let's say, going forward, the position will be non-exempt and that overtime wages will need to be paid. The other thing you want to do is fix any other similarly situated employees, and that means you should make good faith efforts to even find employees who were in that same job who may not even be there any longer. You need to show good faith that you are wanting to correct and owe the wages back to even an employee who has left. So you want to send some letters certified to employees who previously worked there and state that you need to correct a wage and hour issue. And generally, when you send them that type of letter where they think there might be money coming to them, boy, they will come out of the woodwork. So usually they're going to communicate with you. And that means also other employees similarly situated who are currently working with you. So you don't just fix one, you need to make sure that you fix them all. The other issue with looking into the classification. So let's say you have an employee that comes forth, lodges a complaint in HR and says, hey, I don't think this is fair. I just read an article and I found out that I'm really supposed to be a non-exempt and I should be getting overtime pay. All right, so here's where you're going to have to do the analysis. And this is why those white-collar exemption duties tests are going to come into play. You're really going to have to take a look at it. So just like I did with Chris's company, who's the COO and his e-commerce specialist, Isabella, we had to do an evaluation on whether or not Isabella was an exempt employee. So what you would need to do to investigate that is, first of all, look at what the employee does every day. Don't just look at the job description or the job title, because those things do not define the exemption. It's the actual work performed. I mean, Family Dollar, I'm sure you all are familiar with that retail store. Unfortunately, they got walloped a number of years ago in Tampa, Florida. Significant case, huge collective action case. Over 1,400 employees who were managers were wrongfully classified by Family Dollar, and ultimately they had kind of a smackdown in court. It cost them about $35 million to rectify that case. So we don't want to head down that road. The problem was that they had managers that were exempts, but what were they doing every day? They were mopping floors, they were cashiering, they were doing receiving when the trucks would come in. So you know that old saying, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it must be a duck. Well, sure, from the Department of Labor and specifically the wage and hour divisions, from their perspective, if you're mopping floors, you're cashiering, you're merchandising, you're doing receiving and shipping, well, you're really performing as a non-exempt. So it doesn't matter that your name tag says you're a store manager. It's really the work that is performed that drives your classification. And that's how they got hammered. You can call someone an astronaut, but that doesn't mean that they're doing the job of an astronaut. They're sweeping floors. So you can call them anything you want, and you can make a job description look pretty, but that isn't going to matter if you had a wage and hour investigation. So what do you do if you have an employee who comes forth with a complaint that they've been misclassified, and they say, hey, I read an article and I just figured out that I'm supposed to be earning overtime? Well, first of all, in the complaint intake, you're going to ask a lot of open-ended questions, as you would normally do in investigative intake. You want to look at the employee's job description, ask some questions, tell me specifically how your work every day that you're performing may be different than what you see in this job description. You're then going to want to talk with the manager, and you're going to want to interact with the manager and see if what the employee said in the complaint intake is accurate. And then at that point, you're going to look at other similarly situated employees. Are there any others who are of the same job title? Then you're going to want to interview other employees and see if that is so. It may be that it's not necessarily the entire job that's the problem. Maybe this one particular employee's job has somehow shifted. Maybe the manager is really relying on this one employee too much, and the duties and tasks this one employee is performing is maybe completely different than some of the others in that job category. But you're really going to need to do the analysis. And then if you have determined that the employee has been misclassified, then you're going to need to negotiate with the employee regarding what they are owed. If they haven't really made any timesheets for the last several years, then they'll have to tell you what it is they're owed. And you would have to go back 24 months from the date that you've done this analysis. And that's the statute of limitations here. You go back 24 months, 2 years, even if the employee had been employed with you for 5 or 6 or 7 years. Now, ethically, my feeling on the matter is that if an employee has worked with you for a while and they really were wrongfully classified, I would go back longer than that. I would not just go back what the law says. Ethically, you owe this employee back pay. Now, that may be a hard sell for some of your leadership, but I'm just saying I'm a business owner as well. And if I've really made this mistake and I've cheated an employee out of wages, then I feel the right thing to do is to rectify it. It's the ethical thing to do. But you have to go back and reconcile that and then update the job description. So going forward, their classification. And by the way, every job description should say FLSA status, whatever it is. So going forward, it will be non-exempt, let's say hourly. And that means going forward, then this employee will be paid overtime pay. This can be a little sticky. A lot of employees, when they find out that there is a misclassification, they're pretty angry because they've not had the benefit of that income over the last couple of years. So the other thing I'm going to recommend to you when you've conducted an investigation, if your findings show that you have made a mistake, please consult your legal counsel. Why? In some cases, the expenditure is going to be really, really significant for the company, but also the amount of lump sum that you will be giving the employee could also suddenly cause them financial hardship, where now they've been pushed into a much higher tax bracket. So there may even need to be a grossing up of what you owe them in order to help them because they've suffered financial injury as a result of your significant mistake. So work with an attorney that is very, very familiar with managing the FLSA cases like this so that they can guide you every step of the way so you're not going to have what already is a hot mess turn even into a hotter mess. All right, so there you have it. That is a summary of what is going on with the new Biden administration rules, the legal challenges, and then also what to do if you had a misclassified situation. That's it for me today. I look forward to seeing you back at another one of my HR Investigations podcasts. See ya.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with the case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.